Warning. The following podcast contains politics, leftist politics, the whole truth, justice, American way thing. We live in a time where one has to post this. Progress is a dirty word, such as science and reason. My superheroes would weep. This podcast contains naughty language as well.
The circle jerk is now complete. When I left Lucas, I was top earner. Now I am submissive.
Welcome, everybody. Oh man, it's been a crazy weekend. If you have seen Infinity War, congrats. If you have seen it for free, even better. There you go. That's how this episode is going to go. And yeah, I mean, you know, it is what it is. On this podcast, we're going to talk about something, you know, that has been brought up to my attention and a lot of people about the Marvel versus DC rivalry. And I think that there's a lot more than just fanboy wars. So I'm going to try and be brief. I did a pre-run on some of this material, and it was way too lengthy. So I'm going to keep it snappy and quick and short, but it will be fun. Hopefully you'll laugh. Hopefully you'll learn some stuff. And, you know, fuck it. Let's have fun. Here's a brand new intro. Alright, so the rivalry began way back. It's gonna take part one's gonna be origin, 1940 to 1970, and you know, back in those days, 1940s, everybody bought comics. You know, there were cowboy comics, pirate comics, romance, kid stuff. That's why the Superman craze was so crazy. It was something new. It offered, you know, superheroes, and it was revolutionary. The thought of a alien coming to save us is still pretty new to this day. There's a lot of xenophobia, you know, so even to this day, you know, people still want to be Superman. They also want to be Batman, because Batman's basically a kid who died in the alley. And, yeah, what better way to become a fully functioning human than to beat crime with your bare hands, you know. Also, the ultimate trinity of DC Comics was, you know, Wonder Woman. You know, it was conceived by a man, but a man who was kind of married to one of the more liberal women rights activists who got the vote. Who helped women get the vote from the 1920s and onward. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. You know, back in the day, comics wasn't just for spandex. You know, a lot of the servicemen fighting World War II were some of the biggest customers because it reminded them of home. You know, so a lot of the nation consumed comics, and it was pretty fucking healthy. However, when the war ended and the 1950s started, there was a big concern that a lot of kids were acting up. Not because, you know, the women went back to the place and the man suffer a traumatic experience in the war. They didn't give a shit about that, apparently. So Congress figured, why not blame comics and media? Kind of like nowadays, they want to blame video games for gun violence. Same shit, different decade. So these hearings brought on the Comic Book Code Authority, which was a censorship body that everybody accepted as the status quo. And basically what happened, a lot of the comic books closed, and, you know, Superman was no longer a social justice warrior, bulletproof. Batman didn't have dual wielding guns, like in the original comics, year one. He now had a sidekick when, Robin, his number two guy. And he was more tame, and, Wonder Woman went back to dating Steve, instead of being the beacon of feminism. Because back in those days, feminism meant equality, not like, screw mankind. Man, just in general. So it was always about equality. And speaking of equality, all the comics were basically the same. They were kind of stupid, silly, and that's where the original "This Is Kid Stuff" nickname, or silly comic book stuff came out of it, because all the comics around that time were kind of the same and crappy and childish, and guess who continued to buy comics, out of childhood? It was nerds, 1950s nerds. And those are the ones who continued to buy comics, In the 1950s, also, the movies by Hollywood were mostly sanitized sci-fi escapism, with giant bugs and atomic whatnot. And then in the 60s, were mostly anti, communist propaganda and trippy escapism. Nerds continued to buy DC Comics. I think that Marvel still had Captain America, every once in a while, and, the Human Torch. Those were the original go-to guys. So, when the Silver Age rolled around, it was Julie Schwartz who reinvented pretty much everybody. He started with the Flash, then the Green Lantern, then, the Atom, Hawkman, and, when they were going to redo the Justice Society, the first superhero group, it belongs to DC, they decided to call it the Justice League. One thing led to another, and the Justice League sold really well. And this caused greed for, Marvel Comics. The president of DC was playing golf with the president of Marvel Comics, and, the DC guy was bragging that Justice League was selling really well, and guess what? The Marvel guy was like, hey, Stan Lee, make me a superhero group to compete. And, Challengers of the Unknown was born. Fantastic Four. Same shit. Different name. Look it up. And that's where the rivalry comes from. Basically, it was born out of greed and competition. Now, to make it more tolerable and playful, Stan Lee used to have a bullpen, where, he would just talk about upcoming books, but also would, kind of use this as the ultimate social media. Before the internet, before Twitter, before, YouTube and Collider and all that shit. This is how nerds heard the gospel. And, go ahead and Google some of those by Stan Lee, or if you have any Marvel comics, just check them out yourself. Same shit. 3 things that come out of this. It's kind of telling. Because a lot of the iconic things were ripped off from DC, Marvel decided to call it, it's not your father's superheroes. It's kind of like, it's not really a remake. That's how Hollywood, reinterprets this shit. Or a video game remake, it's not just a port, from the PC. It's something else. This is not your father's PC port. That's how they convince people. And, go ahead and check out Joe Kubert. The man is a legend. He actually has a school for comic book artists and writers. Very, very talented icon. He reinvented Hawkman as a, meek person that kind of discovers an alien ancient race that was worshipped as gods in antiquity. If that sounds like Thor, well, that's where they got the idea. In fact, if you have seen the Thor interpretation from the Incredible Hulk TV show, it's basically, you yell Shazam into the hammer, but it's Odin. And, Carter Hall transfer. I'm sorry. it's basically Hawkman. So, yeah. Also, Stanley was responsible to, start the bullshit DC versus Marvel war by calling DC Brand X. Check it out. Google it. There's a bunch of Stanley interviews where he says Brand X doesn't do this, Brand X doesn't do that. And he also calls them true believers, which is kind of cultish, and it always seemed like a fucking cult when you call somebody true believers. It's like, I'm not going to drink the fucking Kool-Aid. And last but not least, make mine Marvel. Those were the 3 items in which basically, make mine marketing. That's what it means. Give me all your money. And it was basically born, not because, lightning in a bottle or creative genius. No, it was more like Stanley was like, hey, there's Robin, we've had Bucky, but all the people buying our comics are teenagers. Let's make Spider-Man teenager. And if you've seen the pulp magazine of the Spider-Man kind of borrowed heavily the look. Check it out. Google it. So that's where the rivalry was born. So yeah, we didn't start this. To quote Batman vs. Superman, that son of a bitch brought the war to us. Now, the propagation happened between 1970s and the year 2000. The baby boomers basically grew to own the current media giants that we have right now. But the baby boomers were fucking spoiled. They were called the greatest generation by some. And clearly right now, they're, that kind of thinking has led to global warming. And we don't think they're that fucking great. Because we're going to inherit their fucking mess. They've done a lot of cool shit, don't get me wrong. But, anyways, a lot of the baby boomers were, suburban white people. And that was mostly the Marvel appeal, That's why, people like the classic Marvel heroes, the latest incarnations of, Black Captain America, Asian Hulk, Muslim Miss Marvel, African American woman Riri as Iron Man. It faced a lot of backlash because of that. Because Marvel appealed to a lot of white people. They had mutants before minorities, pretty much. And yeah, that's how they appealed to, a lot of kids. They were kind of just like baby boomers, mostly white kids. I mean, the main difference back in the day is that real nerds like 2001 Space Odyssey, whereas the general public was like, oh yeah, that was some trippy shit. The general public liked Star Trek, the TV show. Nerds fucking talked about it, and they bought the posters, the T-shirts. They kept the continuation going. When Star Wars came out, both the public and regular nerds were just kind of like, oh my god, this is fucking awesome. However, the media at that point were a lot of baby boomers in their early 20s, and they just kind of said Star Wars is a game changer. They kind of focused on the special effects. They didn't compare it to Buck Rogers. They didn't compare it to the movie serials of the 40s and 50s. They didn't understand the mythos and stuff like that. They were just like, oh, this shit's cool. That's why, if you've seen the TV show, that 70s show, Star Wars is referenced all the time. But most nerds around that time, they had other sources of entertainment. They had the Isaac Asimov book club. They had pulp comics, to look back and stuff. And while that shit continued in the 70s to just, popularize Star Wars, real nerds had other stuff. They had, Dungeons and Dragons, Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who, and stuff like that. Another way to compare it would be, the 1960s Batman TV show. Mainstream loved it, but if you ask a lot of comic book fans around that time, they're kind of like, ugh, this is not the comics Batman. Michael Uslan, who is the producer of every Batman movie, He was heavily featured in the Bill Finger documentary about Hulu. Check him out. He spoke out against the Batman TV show. It's fucking campy. As a child, I fucking loved it. But yeah, it's fucking campy. But so that's the difference. If you read the comics, you know what the source material is like. If you don't, you're just kind of like going by the social media. So flash forward to Superman Richard Donner. That was a mainstream hit. And same shit. Baby boomers were like, wow, this is, the coolest Superman ever. This is my Superman. Even though there are more than 2,000 episodes of the Superman radio. And the Superman radio, if you don't know, has contributed a lot more material to Superman than the Richard Donner movies. Not to mention, we had the George Reeve TV show, and we had the Max Fleischer cartoons. So all the baby boomers didn't give a shit about that. They just give a shit about the Richard Donner, which is why, to this day, we have been engraved into our society that that's the pinnacle of Superman in entertainment. I happen to disagree, but that's because I'm not a baby boomer. So yeah, it was basically the same shit. Now, one of the things that happened is that Generation X was born. And they weren't necessarily as big of a population shift as the baby boomers, but they contributed quite a bit. When those kids came into the 80s, the baby boomers were becoming old. The 80s happened during a political conservatism, popularity, an economic downturn, and the measures, the successes of the baby boomers were becoming irrelevant because there was nuclear war between the USSR and USA. So how was this reflected? Well, the Gen X managed to change things forever, to quote the Joker, right? A lot of their mainstream entertainment was fucking dark. For instance, Ridley Scott's Alien. It was greenlit because people at Fox were like, haha, we're going to have another Star Wars. And Ridley Scott was like, no, fuck you. With that success, people at Warner Brothers were like, ooh, cool, we're going to have another franchise, with Blade Runner. And that was lightning in a bottle. Still, it's one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. The sequel, amazing. Check out both back to back if you can. But even like smaller movies like Predator, people are like, oh, Schwarzenegger can't act for shit. I'm like, fuck you. Watch Predator. Paul Verhoeven, who's brought some European sensitivity into the US, really fucking embraced futurism and utopia with RoboCop. James Cameron also, made Schwarzenegger a household name, brought some really dark, gritty, R-rated Terminator material to the 80s. I mean, fuck, even the movie Dune by David Fincher. David Lynch. Sorry, I'm getting ahead on the slides. I have some pretty cool David Fincher stuff coming up, don't worry. But yeah, David Lynch actually walked away from this movie. But if you've seen the work print cut of Dune, it's fucking amazing. So all these movies kind of resemble some of the most popular comics of the 80s. Crisis, finally fixed DC continuity, and they killed off a shitload of people. And it was fucking dark. A lot of the noobs would say, well, Watchmen and Dark Knight, but it kind of began during Crisis. That was definitely when people got dark and gritty. Sure, Frank Miller did start it with Elektra. But, it wasn't a giant reinvention accepted by the mainstream. When fucking Frank Miller did The Dark Knight Return, fucking Rolling Stone was doing interviews about him. Same thing with Watchmen, and most importantly, the first issues of Sandman came in the 80s. So the 80s, the Gen X people, fuck dude, they did an amazing fucking thing. And this is kind of like, I'm not a Gen Xer, nor am I a millennial. I have my own little generation called the Oregon Trail generation. Yes, that one. You died of dysentery. Yep, that's my generation. So I grew up with all that cool shit, and I turned out fine. So, the other cool thing is that, it kind of empowered people to, not give a fuck about, having dark entertainment and like, oh my god, your childhood's destroyed. We were in the middle of fucking two nuclear powers going at it. So people decided to be coy and decided to get fucking real. Around the 90s, it brought us to millennials. And while, the baby boomers were bigger than Gen X and the Oregon Trail generation, the next bigger change came from millennials. In the 90s, people were doing pretty good. So they decided to have, one or two more kids. And, one of the things that you could tell that shit was being handled a little bit different is by the way they decided to act. And by them, I mean the baby boomers. When the Gen X people said, you know what, fuck this. I don't want some old ass corporation to own my shit. I'm going to go ahead and make Image comics. Well, do you think that, those three things that, people like Stan Lee and their fan base used to trash DC? Do you think they used it to trash, Marvel against Image? Well, not necessarily. Nobody said, like, this is not your father's superheroes when speaking about Image and talking about Marvel's lack of relevance at this point. That didn't happen, actually. In fact, the 90s, early 90s, people were busy collecting multiple covers of comics. And that shit kind of almost bankrupted the comics as a medium here in the States, So that was kind of disappointing. Now, do you think that people, not Stan Lee, but rather Jim Lee, do you think Jim Lee had a bullpen and was like, Brian Dex doesn't do it like us, youngsters? He didn't do that shit. In fact, because, the X-Men artist, was so popular and, then decided to make other characters that kind of look similar to the X-Men, Marvel was like, Jim Lee, you can't fucking do this. We're going to copyright or trademark the letter X. So the letter X only appears on X-Men comics. Google it. That shit is fucking hysterical. Oh, man. So Brand X doesn't do it like us. Basically, Marvel wanted to copyright or trademark the letter X. That was fucking crazy. And yeah, Todd McFarlane wasn't like, hey, make mine Marvel. Fuck that shit. Make mine Image. It's like, no, they didn't do that shit. Because that shit was tacky. Those artists and writers walked out of Marvel and said, fuck this. We're not going to be like the baby boomers. They decided to take a stand. And that's when the comic book guy kind of reigned supreme. Because, the comic book guy was kind of like the patron, the patron, the jefe, the boss of the comic book stores. Basically mainstream wasn't selling many comics in the grocery stores or, newspaper stands were kind of disappearing. So a lot of comic books were sold in stores. And those were the ones that called the shots. So while DC and Marvel were fighting over comic book covers, the main authority was your store comic book guy. And, Gen Xers did the same shit with, the record company. If you look at many movies like High Fidelity, people were kind of snobby. They're like, we know what's up. Same shit with comics. People are snobby. They're like, we know what's up. So they were the ones who actually decided what was good and what was bad. And if Marvel was making them more money than DC, guess what happened? They sided with Marvel. And that's how the rivalry was kind of, shifted. Or more like the authority no longer reigned supreme on your buddies. It was basically if your store dude was a Marvel guy, they would carry more Marvel shit. And that's how it was during the 90s. I hate to break it to you, but, that's how it was nationwide in the U.S. When I came to the U.S., I didn't know that there was an Image Comics. I didn't know there was a Marvel Comics. The only thing Marvel related that I knew was Spider-Man, the Hulk, and that's it. Because, the Hulk and Spider-Man TV shows. So that was surprising, the fact that, there were comic book companies, and I didn't know who Wolverine was, and I didn't know who Spawn was. So it was kind of interesting, because I came to this country in the 90s. So it was kind of like I understood what people were doing in the comic book stores, They were the head geeks. One of the interesting parts was that you could tell who was in charge of the head geek business, as it were. Even a movie as awesome as the Independence Day movie, I was fucking blown away by it. I remember one of the commercials for it. A reviewer was saying, "This generation's Star Wars." And I was like, what the fuck? Who decides this shit, right? It wasn't this generation's Battlestar Galactica, this generation's Day the Earth Stood Still, which is more closely related to it. It wasn't this generation's, bodies, Invasion from the Body Snatchers, this generation's It Came from Outer Space, none of that shit. And it was so fucked up because obviously Fox Studios wanted to promote Star Wars. And it was so fucked up because obviously the baby boomers who were making Independence Day were like, yay, they compared to Star Wars. And the marketing people, yay, they compared to Star Wars. And the baby boomers were like, oh yeah, we totally get it. Fucking Han Solo. No, it was not this generation's Star Wars. It was this fucking generation's Independence Day movie. And that's when, it kind of started to make sense that people were kind of brainwashed. I mean, I love 90s movies because, I came in 94 to the US, and by this time I was fucking in love with Jurassic Park. I have a very, very soft spot for it. And, the 90s movies were not as hardcore as the 80s because it reflected the times, Terminator 2 wasn't as dark as the first Terminator. Jurassic Park had some death, but it wasn't as shocking as E.T. The part where spoiler alert, E.T. turns white and is dying. There wasn't like, oh shit. There's some gruesome stuff in Jurassic Park, but it's the one dinosaur eats a lawyer. Big fucking deal, Everybody hates lawyers. Even Stargate was kind of sanitized. And, Fifth Element was awesome, but it was not, rated R. There was some nudity, but it wasn't like, oh my god. Episode 1, it was pretty awesome. For what it was, some dude gets cut in half. Pretty fucking gruesome, but it was aimed towards kids, as dark as that movie got, it was definitely marketed towards kids. It wasn't until like The Matrix came along that was R-rated, and you were like, yeah, they're fucking doing something dark. Meanwhile, the comics in the 90s, the alternative printing definitely propelled, Image Comics, Valiant, Milestone, CrossGen, Wildstorm, even I think Neil Adams had his own company, and one of them was the Revengers, the Ultimate Man Megalith comic. That was pretty interesting. However, the 90s did have a dark side. And if you've seen these fucking movies, you would tell me I'm not crazy. Starship Troopers, fucking dark. Event Horizon, fucking dark and disturbing. Existence, Mimic. I suggest Mimic's the director's cut by Guillermo del Toro. Dark City, which kind of inspired The Matrix. Santa Sangre, Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me. Seven, my fucking god, the movie's dark as fuck. City of Lost Children, beautiful fairy tale, but relatively darker. The most fairy tales of the 90s, when most people were like, I want to be a Disney princess, which, I'm sorry, it's just kind of ruined a whole generation of women. Instead of worshiping Ripley from Aliens, they're like, I want to be Ariel. I'm like, fuck. So yeah, the 90s had a darker side. I recommend Lost Highway 2, by the way, if you see it, by David Lynch. Yeah. So the 90s were definitely kind of, it was a mixed bag, but, the rivalry between DC and Marvel didn't dissipate. In fact, you would think that having a shitty company like Marvel create a walkout by all the top talent in the business to create Image Comics would ruin their reputation. No, you would think that Marvel just almost ruining comics here in the States by creating so fucking many variant covers would, make them be like, let's hate it. No, it wasn't. And one thing that is interesting is that around this time, Joe Quesada, who was an upcoming Marvel guy, used to talk shit about DC Comics. Used to call them AOL Comics. And guess what? Nobody calls Marvel Comics Disney Comics. And that's kind of goes to show you the mentality. It's like, Marvel can't fucking do no wrong. And it's because basically the baby boomers started to own the stores that were the ones to make money. And if it sells, fuck it, I'm going to crush all the competition. They became their own fucking Lex Luthors. And I just want to point out this comic over here called The Authority. If you don't know what this comic is, this was a comic that made Ultimate Marvel happen. And it basically pushed Marvel to be better than themselves. It is kind of responsible for Marvel avoiding bankruptcy. Yeah, and guess what? It's now a DC property. Now I mentioned how, this generation, the millennials, most of the women grew up thinking they want to be a Disney princess and mermaids and shit. And, one of the side effects of that Mickey Mouse bullshit nonsense is that, Princess Bride became more popular than Ripley. Emo became more popular than goth or 80s new wave or the original shit. Punk became more safe and popular than actual punk. High School Musical became more popular and respected than Rocky Horror Picture Show. Nice, friendly rap became more popular, more prominent, more accepted than gangsta rap. And smart, intellectual music like Rage Against the Machine and System of a Down were mostly drowned out by screamo and whiny fucking little bands. So the generation of little kids that grew up in the safe 90s, they didn't really want to, be seen as not popular. They always liked the popular shit, and that's because the internet kind of basically was telling people what to do. If you're a nerd, back in the days, you liked Star Wars, whether or not it was popular. If you were a nerd in the late 90s, people would call you out for liking Star Wars Episode 1. So it was a really, really difficult time for nerds. It wasn't necessarily as much as liking shit. It was more about talking about liking shit. And that kind of that kind of lends itself to something that I like to call, instead of social media, social mania. Um, and I had to make this graph to kind of represent that shit. Basically, intake all, binge me bitch, internet, same cycle again. And it all started with the hype for episode 1. People were more excited about the fucking trailer and about Star Wars than the actual movie. I wasn't. I actually liked the fucking movie, I actually liked the movie, and people didn't accept that. People were like, well, we as a society have decided that the trailer was great and we're gonna move on. I'm like, no, dude, fuck you. I still care about this shit. And that's what happened. Slowly but surely, you had, the comic book guy no longer had the fucking power. It was websites like Antiquated News, who was run by, if you can believe, someone that actually calls himself the head geek, who is now an alleged sex offender, Harry Knowles. And also, that website used to contribute a lot to the Alamo Draft House in Texas. And, the other person who was kind of a big headshot or big honcho over there was Devin Ferrazzi, another alleged sex offender. So a lot of these people in high places in Geek Kingdom were kind of scummy, and they kind of took advantage of the situation. Like, I remember Harry Knowles giving Green Lantern, the movie, a great review after Warner Brothers sent him a care package. Now, you think that as a DC fan, I'll be fucking happy, but no, I like Green Lantern, whether or not the movie is good or bad. If the movie is good, fuck yeah, I'll watch it more than once. I'll even buy shit, But I like shit no matter if it's good or bad. I like what I like, And that's what these websites don't let you fucking be. Like the current website called Collider, this fucking monstrosity, It's basically, okay. In the 90s, the comic book store guy would make money by the shit he or she sold. These online companies are basically click-based revenue. And whatever gets them the more views, that's what they support. And that said, nothing really has changed. I mean, Antiquated News stopped being relevant, and now it's websites like Collider or, YouTube talking heads and shit like that. And that hasn't really changed much as far as, the demographics. Now, what does it mean for the generation? Well, and for how we move forward past this. Alright, so all of this is just to empower you. Remember the part where in The Dark Knight, the little kid goes, he didn't do anything wrong. When Batman is fleeing and taking the blame for everything? Well, as a DC fan, you're battling not only social norms of popularity, you're also battling ignorance, clickbait revenue websites that, delve into gossip and they're just a cesspool of shit. You're battling attention whore media social types. You're battling populism heavy USA. Kind of a weird Nazi flinging at the moment. It's fucked up. And you're also battling troll-based satisfaction by really unsavory people. You're also fighting a giant Disney corporation that, whether you like it or not, they're not fucking sitting around going, it's okay to like both. No, fuck that. They're basically congratulating themselves. If whatever they cannot achieve, they will buy. They don't really give a fuck about their employees and the happiest place on earth either. Do you really think they're going to think kindly and on any fucking competition? They banned the LA Times from attending their movies because said paper discovered corruption within the Mickey Mouse Corporation and city officials. I mean, as a minority, do you really think I've stopped being Mexican when the KKK is on the resurgence and the GOP is okay with some president person calling Mexican rapists? Fuck no. I never stopped being Mexican. Neither should you stop being DC fan. I mean, do you think I'm going to stop being a DC fan because people are assholes against us online? No, fuck no. Do you think I'm going to go around saying it's okay to like both Mexicans and Nazis? Fuck no. Then again, I don't go fucking around trolling Nazis online. That's my prerogative. But I do what I do with being Mexican and being proud of DC. I basically share my culture and ignore the fucking haters. You know, some people might say like, well, did you just compare Marvel fans to Nazis? Fuck no. Well, unless it's the Hydra agent Captain America. That one's a very specific issue, and most Marvel fans kind of forgot about that part. But yeah, that was fucked up. So I'm just merely comparing assholes to not liking Mexicans to assholes not liking DC. Simple as that. Same shit. But it doesn't stop me from being a DC fan or Mexican. What do you gotta do? Fucking be yourself. I mean, do you really want to be led and shaped by social acceptance? No. You know, people are beginning to get their rights. You know, gay marriage, not discrimination over race, nationality, skin color, religion. I mean, fuck. You know, we're just beginning to accept people not, you know, putting gender on people. Like, you know, it's kind of like putting a fucking label on someone. Like, oh, you're just a worker. You're not a business person. You're not wealthy. Fuck you. You don't have 2 cars. How fucking lame of you. You don't own your business. Fuck you. It's kind of that shit, you know? Now, I don't want to be shaped by social acceptance, you know, because usually no major game changer would ever take place in pop culture, entertainment, or society by accepting the social norms. I mean, do you really think comic book readers have given up reading comics because of social norms? No, fuck that. We just had Free Comic Book Day, and a lot of fucking people went to it. You know, Europe never really stopped giving a fuck about seeing comics as a medium, not just spandex. You know, Japan, for instance, never lets USA mainstream dictate their comics, manga, or anime. I mean, do you really think Japan gives 2 fucks what Crunchyroll deems as the best manga or anime? No, fuck that. You know, same thing with video games. Do you really think Japan gives 2 shits about what an American company like IGN or Kotaku say about video games in Japan? Fuck no. Like, don't be so fucking gullible. Japan is not fucking dumb, and neither should you. They know their culture. They know what's up. But they also know what it's like to be a social media zombie, and they're like, no, we're gonna do our own fucking shit, you know? There are social media people that are just like, yeah, fuck it, let's buy spinners or whatever. But no, most people in Japan know what's up. They kind of go with the trend, but they, you know, 1 or 2 days after, they're like, fuck it, let's do our own thing still, you know? I've seen no, like, Fox News talking heads represent any fucking clients in court, you know? It's like, they bombard you with all these ideas on their networks, but it's not like Sean Hannity is going to represent you if you get in trouble, you know? If you watch Sean Hannity and you're like, Your Honor, I did what Sean Hannity told me to do. Sean Hannity is not going to fucking represent you. So, there you go. You're on your fucking own. You know, this is the era where people believe fake media instead of lawyers. You know, if somebody goes on Fox News talking about gun laws, I mean, they're not really qualified to talk about that shit. If you really want to know about the law, talk to a lawyer or cops. They'll be like, no, sir, you cannot carry a bazooka into a police station because it's your Second Amendment. That's just fucking dumb. You know? So why would you let, you know, fucking popular media tell you what to like? You know? If you know cinema, if you know comics, you kind of know MCU is not the best ever fucking thing ever. Look, check out all these awesome movies that we had without giving 2 fucks about, the MCU. I mean, just fucking look at him. Yeah, most like half of it is pretty much like definitely Marvel. You have like the Spider-Man trilogy, Blade trilogy, the X-Men trilogy, Wolverine trilogy, the other X-Men trilogy. But you also had wonderful gems. Like Watchmen, 300, Hellboy, 1 and 2, Unbreakable, B for Vendetta, Road to Perdition, The Dark Knight Trilogy, A History of Violence, Ghost World, Sin City, 1 and 2, Persepolis, American Splendor, Scott Pilgrim, and even Superman fucking Returns that kind of like made the baby boomers go, here's part 3 to your Richard Donner movies. So we've had a very long history, and I think that's why I'm really happy about the rivalry, because a lot of kids who, I don't want to call them the Columbine generation, who are turning 18, who were born when the Columbine, tragedy happened, and now they're going to be able to get out there and vote. They grew up with an amalgam of comics before the MCU. They grew up with really cool shit, and they're kind of taking the roles into themselves very seriously. They're going to change the fucking world. They're going to be like, well, Taco Bell is as authentic as, Britney Spears is an actual singer. They know shit that is not, authentic. So that's actually kind of encouraging, for instance, people ask me, like, is it okay to like both? And I'm like, actually, it's just okay to like. There are actually more than 2 comic book companies. And whatever you like, you like. Don't fucking spend any time worrying what the fuck the other person is going to be like, oh my god, what's popular? Fuck that. You gotta understand that you need to share the power. I've been doing help support for DC fans online since Man of Steel. I feel like I'm almost a psychologist and treating a mental trauma in large groups. But guess what? It's been natural for me since I'm in the USA and I feel marginalized as a minority. When I was in Mexico, I was just me. I was just an individual. Or like in the US, it's like, well, you're Mexican first, and then we're gonna add you a bunch of adjectives like, nerdy or this and this and that. Now, the more mainstream you are in the USA, the better it is to fit in. Baseball, country, flag waving, all this stuff. However, I never really just focused on myself and never helped anybody else. Being a DC fan also means having to teach people about not only DC comics, but all sorts of other things. Given that basically being a DC fan is comparable to being someone that you have to teach others, if you're a woman and some idiot says something about, women that doesn't know shit, you're going to fucking teach them. Same thing as a Mexican. I teach everybody about my culture. We kind of live in a really weird time right now. There's a literal wall being built against us Mexicans, and Congress is building a wall against Warner Brothers to merge with AT&T simply because Disney can buy Fox Studios and no one gives a fuck. It is also noting that Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox, is a conservative, and Marvel CEO, used to be on the team with Trump. I mean, it's fucked up dirty. And this kind of like bipartisanship bickering translates to, 2 console war and 2 comic book wars. And yeah, it's really fucked up, but yeah, that's what you're dealing with, for instance, like Disney's Harvey Weinstein. Everybody forgot the Disney part when his fucking charade came apart. Like nobody in reporting goes like, well, Disney's Harvey Weinstein, they let him get away with so much shit. And Miramax, who was owned by Disney, no, nobody said that shit, So yeah, as a DC fan, you have a lot of shit to put up with. So what I'm doing with my podcast is kind of giving you not so much ammunition to go out there and fuck somebody up, but I want you to have knowledge, and I want you to like be proud of who you are. Are you sick of the Marvel versus DC rivalry? Well, it's not going to go away. Racism's not going to go away. Sexism's not going to go away. Ignorance can go away. And the only thing that we can do is teach people about DC. That's how you get rid of ignorance. So yeah, be proud. And yeah, that's been our little podcast here. Just want to congratulate you for watching this. You are a DC fan. You're fucking brave. But just know that the rivalry online is not going to go away. But because we didn't start it, Stanley did. We didn't propagate it. The baby boomers did. We're going to fucking finish it. We're going to finish this fucking fight. There are new generations coming up, and we have one leg up over Marvel. Our comics are mythical. You know, they're mythic. And they're not marketed to generic, people. The Russo brothers just said, DC heroes are not as appealing. Well, they're not as appealing to your generic white bread piece of shit. They're appealing to people who feel alienated, who like the US. That's basically 90% of the world. They appeal to little kids, who want to grow up to be Batman. That takes care of the next generation. They appeal to women, because we made Wonder Woman fucking awesome, And not only that, everything that made Marvel great, we fucking own it. We know it. Now all we have to do is just fucking share it, destroy the ignorance, and be fucking proud. Have you tried not being a DC comic? Fuck that. I was born a DC guy, and I'm always going to be a DC guy. So, like what you like, and, fuck everything else. Don't worry about it. This is going to be a long haul, and why spend your time worrying? Enjoy what you like. Dile sí a DC. See you next podcast.